I'm 80 years old, and I want to share something that may surprise some people. For half a century, I remained in a marriage that slowly drained the life out of me. It didn't harm me physically, although the stress certainly tried to. But emotionally and spiritually, I felt myself fading year after year. The hardest part is that deep down, I knew the truth much earlier. I recognized the problem when I was 30. I felt it even more clearly when I was 40. And by 50, I understood it completely, yet I stayed. It wasn't until I reached 75 years old that I finally walked away. Many people thought I had lost my mind. They said things like, "You've already stayed this long, why leave now?" Others suggested I simply wait it out, implying that at our age the end would come soon enough anyway. But waiting for someone to die is not the same as living. I could no longer spend another year in a house that felt cold and silent, living beside a man who made me feel invisible. So I left. And I want to say something honestly, something people don't always like to hear. Leaving that marriage was the best decision I ever made. My only regret is that I didn't do it decades earlier. Let me go back to the beginning. I met Richard when I was 19 years old. He was 24, confident, charming, and studying law. I was a nursing student at the time, quiet, eager to please, and inexperienced in relationships. Richard pursued me intensely. He sent flowers, wrote letters, and spoke about a future together with great certainty. To me, it felt like being chosen. At 21, I married him. The early years were decent enough. They weren't extraordinary, but they were stable. We lived in a modest apartment. We both worked. Him building his legal career, me working long shifts at the hospital. We had friends. Occasionally we laughed. At the time, I believed this was simply what marriage looked like. Everything began to change when I became pregnant with our first child. Richard grew distant. Small criticisms began appearing in everyday conversations. The house wasn't tidy enough. Dinner wasn't prepared at the exact time he expected. I was too emotional, too tired, too sensitive. At first, I blamed pregnancy hormones. I assumed things would return to normal after the baby arrived. They didn't. After our son was born, the criticism became constant. I wasn't losing the pregnancy weight quickly enough. I spent too much attention on the baby. The house was messy. I was disorganized. One night remains vivid in my memory. I stood in the kitchen holding our crying newborn while looking at a sink full of dishes. Richard walked in, glanced around, and asked a question that cut deeply. "What exactly do you do all day?" Looking back, that might have been the moment I should have left. I was only 25, but instead I convinced myself he was under pressure at work, and I needed to try harder. Over the next several years, we had 2 more children. 3 kids arrived within 6 years. Eventually, I stopped working as a nurse to stay home full-time. Richard believed it made financial sense, and I agreed. I loved my children deeply, but those years were exhausting. I was constantly overwhelmed. Richard would come home, point out something that wasn't done correctly, eat dinner, and then retreat into his study. When I tried to talk about how lonely I felt, he dismissed it. "You're surrounded by the kids all day," he would say. "I'm the one sitting alone in an office." When I asked for help, he reminded me he worked 60 hours every week. What I truly wanted was simple: a partner, someone who saw me, someone who appreciated me, someone who made me feel like I mattered. But at 30 years old, I didn't know how to explain that. I only knew something inside the marriage felt deeply wrong. The years moved quickly after that. Our children grew up. Richard's career expanded rapidly. He became a partner at his law firm. We moved into a larger house and lived a life that looked impressive from the outside. To others, we appeared like the ideal family. But inside that home, I felt like I was disappearing. Richard never hit me. There was never physical violence. However, pain can exist in many forms. There was the constant criticism, the silent treatments that could last days, the way he corrected me in front of the children, the way decisions were made without my input because, as he often reminded me, he was the one earning the money. When I was 38, I tried speaking to my mother about how unhappy I was. She responded with what she believed was practical advice. "Every marriage has problems," she said. "You have a beautiful home and financial security. What more could you want?" I also spoke to my sister. Her response was similar. "That's just how men are," she said. "At least he doesn't drink or cheat." So I tried to be grateful. I reminded myself that my children were healthy. We had food on the table, we had stability. My body carried no bruises, only the ones that can't be seen. When I turned 42, I seriously considered leaving. The children were older. I could return to nursing. I believed I could support myself. Many nights I stayed awake imagining what a different life might look like. But then our middle daughter, Sarah, began struggling with depression at school. Her therapist said stability at home was important. The idea of disrupting her life during such a fragile time felt impossible. So once again, I stayed. At 50, the thought returned. The kids were nearly grown. I had more independence. But Richard's mother became seriously ill, and he was deeply affected by it. Leaving during that period felt cruel, so I stayed. At 55, our youngest graduated from college. For a moment, I believed my opportunity had arrived. Then grandchildren entered our lives. My daughter needed help. The family needed support. Leaving felt selfish. So again, I stayed. When I reached 60, menopause brought many changes. Instead of understanding, Richard treated it like an inconvenience. My mood changes irritated him. My hot flashes disturbed his sleep. My aging body seemed to embarrass him. He began staying later at the office and interacting with me less and less. Eventually, we became like two polite strangers sharing the same home. By 65, I realized we hadn't shared a meaningful conversation in years. We spoke about practical matters, grandchildren, repairs, schedules, but never about emotions or dreams. There was no us. Perhaps there never had been. At 68, Richard retired. Part of me hoped retirement would allow us to reconnect. Instead, things became worse. Now he was home constantly, observing everything I did and criticizing it. How I folded clothes, how I loaded the dishwasher, how I organized the house. It felt like I was constantly being evaluated. Eventually, the stress began affecting my health. I started experiencing panic attacks during the night. My doctor prescribed medication. Richard told me I was exaggerating. At 72, I finally confronted him. During dinner one evening, I told him directly that I had been unhappy for a very long time and that we needed to discuss our marriage. He looked confused. Then he said, "What are you talking about? Our life is perfectly fine." I tried explaining that I felt unloved and alone. His response was simple. "You're being unreasonable. We've been married for 50 years. This is what marriage is." In that moment, I understood something clearly. He had no interest in changing. For him, our arrangement worked perfectly well. For me, it felt unbearable. Soon after, I began seeing a therapist. She asked me a question that shifted everything. "If nothing changes," she said, "what will your life look like in 5 years? In 10 years?" The answer appeared immediately. More loneliness, more criticism, more years passing quietly until one of us died. That was not the future I wanted. So I spoke with a lawyer. Despite the fact that Richard had earned most of the income, decades of marriage meant I still had legal rights. I had supported the family, raised our children, and sacrificed my own career. The lawyer explained that I would receive my fair share and could live comfortably. When I told Richard I wanted a divorce at 74, he laughed. He couldn't imagine someone leaving after so many years. But when he received the official papers, his reaction changed to anger. He accused me of being ungrateful after everything he had provided. Our children were shocked as well. Some tried to convince me to reconsider. They said their father wasn't truly that bad. They worried about the family dynamic and the grandchildren. But I had already thought deeply about the grandchildren. I didn't want my granddaughters growing up believing women should accept emotional emptiness, and I didn't want my grandsons believing marriage meant simply tolerating someone. The divorce process lasted about a year. Richard resisted many aspects out of resentment, but eventually the legal process ended. At 75, I walked out of the courthouse free. I moved into a small apartment filled with sunlight. I decorated it exactly the way I wanted. I joined a book club. I began painting classes. I adopted a cat. And for the first time in decades, I started traveling to Italy, Greece, and Ireland. What I discovered during those years was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Joy, real joy. I woke up each morning without dread. I made decisions without criticism. I existed without feeling like a burden. I also made new friends who knew me simply as myself, not as someone's wife. At 77, I even began dating. At an art gallery, I met a man named James. He was 80, a widower, thoughtful, and kind. We spend time together visiting museums, sharing coffee, and talking about life. He holds my hand. He tells me I'm beautiful. Our relationship isn't dramatic or intense. We're both too old for that. But it's genuine companionship, something I never truly experienced in my marriage. Today, I'm 80 years old. I've been divorced for 5 years. And those 5 years have brought me more peace and fulfillment than the previous 5 decades. Yet part of me still feels sadness when I think about how long I waited. 50 years is a long time to feel unseen. I wish I had chosen differently earlier in life. If I could speak to my younger self at 40, 50, or even 60, I would say this: staying in a deeply unhappy marriage doesn't make you strong or noble. It simply means sacrificing your life for something that may never improve. There is no reward for enduring misery. If your relationship is filled with constant criticism, emotional distance, and a lack of respect, you are not required to remain there forever. You do not need to wait until children grow up. You do not need to wait for retirement. And you certainly don't need to wait until you are old. People may judge your decision. Some will call it selfish. Others will say you are giving up too easily. But while marriage requires effort, it should not feel like emotional suffering. It should not erase your sense of worth. Every person deserves either genuine love and partnership, or at the very least, peace and independence. I am happy now, truly happy. But I also recognize how many years passed while I believed endurance was my responsibility. Leaving was not selfish. In many ways, staying would have been worse because it would have filled my remaining years with resentment. If you are in a similar situation, I hope my story offers perspective. Life moves faster than we realize. Even reaching 80, it still feels short. Value your time. Choose a life where you can breathe, grow, and feel respected. And if you're waiting for someone to give you permission to choose happiness, consider this your reminder that you are allowed to pursue a better life. Channel, no filter advice.